they just have a few acres of garden. They farm with a Clydesdale. They have better relationships with the indigenous Maori around there than even the local government. And they're growing varieties of sweet potatoes that haven't been grown in that area for a couple generations. It's a beautiful illustration of what you can do. They were kind enough to let us come visit a few times. The third strain of my own work with some friends and collaborators around the world focuses on what are those motivations for family farmers and beginning farmers that aren't just about money. Any of us need to make enough money or have health care coverage so that we're not worried about starving or going cold or going without clothing, being able to get to where we need to get to, whether it's to take care of family members, to get our children where they need to be. There's a certain basement level that provides dignity in our livelihood. That much is a given, I think. That there's some basement below which abject poverty is just not okay. Beyond that, beyond making a living that allows you to send your kids to school and have them involved and enjoy a decent life, farmers talk about feeling independent. This is part of the mythology of American agrarianism, the independent farmer, without restrictions, without regulations. But it's very complicated around what it is the land offers, where you are, and what's going to be in the best interest of the common good. So this is a project I started in New Zealand, talking with dairy farmers and sheep farmers and deer farmers, and collaborating with friends in the UK and Switzerland and Brazil and Canada. There's almost something universal about this sense of autonomy and independence. So Food Utopias celebrates that the solutions are not always going to come from the institutional bastions of knowledge. In agriculture, it may mean that peasants in Brazil have more to teach us than a geneticist from K-State maybe. The margins in agriculture, like wetlands, are important to ecology. They're important in society, particularly around food and agriculture. The ideas that seem wacky or crazy may just come to help inform the solutions for going forward. There are any number of examples that we can talk about hopeful examples, particularly here in Lawrence. Farmers markets, home gardens, chickens running around town, naughty roosters, farm to school, our local Caw Valley farm tour, the restaurant 715 that butchers its own meat in the basement. Various initiatives to try and match land and farmers that are operating at a much more human scale. Not tens of thousands of acres, but a vacant plot in the city that's now an orchard or a small kind of itinerant farm. It's a legacy of appropriate technology that harkens Kirkpatrick Sale, Scott and Helen Nearing in Maine. It's this kind of connection that Mary Evelyn Tucker talked about last year when she was here. This connection between science, understanding the environment and the planet, and religion. The spirit of collaboration and cooperation. So Food Utopias is not explicitly anti-capitalist or anti-corporate, though I'm not necessarily a fan or think they have a sustainable model. The most important thing to recognize is that Food Utopias, while capable of critique, is more focused on collaboration, hope, and positive social change. This deserves a little more attention. Big Ag, that logic we talked about before, stems from completely different assumptions of how to live in the world. Corporations exist to make profits. Sometimes there are things and services that are created, manufactured, and delivered via a company structure and within a capitalist system that are helpful and good. Sometimes. The issue is just that Monsanto operates by a logic that doesn't care about feeding the world. And it's the same as banks that don't actually care if people come to own their homes. As a minor and small, but I think illustrative example, some of my extended family were part of Blockbuster Video becoming the behemoth it was. They had started video shops in St. Louis that were then purchased that became Blockbuster. In the end, one of the last years of Blockbuster surviving, 20% of their profits came from late fees. 20% of their business model came from late fees. This is not a logic that survives on sharing and cooperation and community. And it's the same logic that drives big ag and our banks. One of the great economists of the 20th century, Karl Polanyi, outlined that there are other ways of doing the economy than just cash exchanges. But that's all we think about when we say we have to grow the economy. Is that we have to grow those quarterly profits. We have to grow our market share. We have to grow money. And Polanyi said that no. When someone takes care of your kids so you can go to work, to do overtime, whether it's a grandparent or a neighbor or a friend, that's part of the economy. When we let someone stay with us because they can't afford their rent for a while, or they missed a paycheck, or something happened, that's part of the economy. The economy is about sharing what we have in community. And we've perverted that into assuming that the only way of living in the world is to create market share, to increase quarterly profits, to increase our paycheck. It's no surprise that the developing research on the economics of happiness demonstrate that above a certain amount of income, more money does not equate to happiness. This is what Polanyi was talking about almost 60 years ago. These new forms of agriculture, possibility, hopeful, community-oriented, demonstrate that these other kinds of economic relationships, that privileged community and the common good exist and are beneficial. When food becomes a commodity, when we turn corn into animal feed, when we feed cows corn rather than grass, food loses many of the things that made it valuable in the first place. It loses its ability to nourish, to create and strengthen bonds, and it loses the ability to provide some security during times of uncertainty. It's time to break up with big ag. That makes uncertainty the norm, not an aberration. It's time to make food food again. Food is not coal. It is not a car. It's a source of life in multiple ways. Food Utopias helps us imagine what a new story of agriculture based on ethics and community looks like again. But like that partner you just can't bring yourself to break up with, we're part of the issue. We shop at Dillon's and Walmart because it's cheaper and easier. And it's not a bad thing. It's tied into a host of structural issues around how our work is structured, how our wages are set up, how our education system is set up, our political systems that are limited to two parties that don't necessarily capture what we're thinking anyway, to the exclusion of the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or any other number of things that might better capture how we actually think about the political spectrum. It's related to zoning and housing and food regulations and transportation systems and the ecology of where we live. It's hard to break up because we don't know what's on the other side. And that's where the process of Food Utopias comes in, by finding friends and collaborators and doing this together. Martin Luther King did not lead the civil rights movement. He was just a very beautiful voice in it. The real work took place at lunch counters and on campuses and in churches and chapels and on marches around the country and then around the world. And it's still happening today and unfolding in courthouses and front porches today, at gay weddings and on farms that ensure health, safety, and the joy of cows eating grass rather than corn. We have to anticipate the joy of breaking up. We have to imagine what's possible. As many of our more famous religious leaders encourage, we have to learn to love our enemies and turn the other cheek. While some in the environmental movement and food activism encourage the battles and the language of victory, we cannot demonize the other. We've made the Monsantos and Cargills and Smithfields and Tysons and Walmarts into the enemy, even though we have family and friends and neighbors that work there. While under the law, corporations are people, which is a major part of the power dynamic that's going on. In reality, they're not just one person. They're most certainly full of people, persons deserving of our love and empathy and dignity and respect. And while I'm thankful and want to support people working on changing legislation and marching against Monsanto and working on GMO labeling, for me, I'm not going to get caught up in winning this battle or that battle that resembles the 4 years of World War I, with the trenches only moving slightly in one direction or the other. I see Food Utopias as a way to move the entire food system, creatively, joyously, and communally. It means challenging our presumed ways of doing things. It means looking for creative solutions. A dam does not typically break in one place. It breaks in many places, from the margins with lots of pressure from one place before the flood breaks through. And that's how I see Food Utopias working. It's working in our classrooms. It's working at the farmer's market. It's working during the farm tour. It's working in our food choices. It's working in our gardens, in our chickens, our conversations, things like this today. Little bits of pressure, trying to link up with other people. It means breaking up with Big Ag in a way that forces them to bring a box of stuff back to us. All the things that we've given to them, the patents, the idea that quantity was more important than quality, that the genetic material in seeds could be owned, that untested chemicals are okay in our breast milk, that we're fine with atrazine even though it mimics estrogen in our water supply. We have given Big Ag a lot of things over the years. It means having to have the breakup talk. But I'm heartened by Thomas Merton, the great Catholic Trappist monk and writer, who in his advice to a young Catholic worker activist who was despairing wrote, "Do not depend on the hope of results. When you are doing the sort of work you have taken on, essentially an apostolic work, you may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and achieve no result at all, if not perhaps results opposite to what you expect. As you get used to this idea, You start more and more to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the truth of the work itself. And there too, a great deal has to be gone through, as gradually as you struggle, less and less for an idea, and more for specific people. The range tends to narrow down, but it gets much more real. In the end, it is the reality of personal relationships that saves everything. This is the hope in our relationships around food, the unknowing of the future, the not yetness, as one utopian scholar put it, that's going to propel us forward. So if we're going to break up with Big Ag, we need to get on with it and pick up the phone right now. Thank you.
Time for some questions.
All right. Rachel.
I don't have so much of a question. I just want to thank you for what you said. It's wonderful and it resonates with me very much. And I'm happy to hear you talking to those people. It's great.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, Dwight.
I was kind of intrigued by, I don't know what the, thinking of this in my head, the kind of legal structure that would be involved. I went and visited family in Norway, and and people were complaining about they had a cheese shortage. And it was partly there was a kind of a run on cheese. It's a small country, but there was also because there was a kind of a dynamic. The dairy farmers, all kind of form a single cooperative, essentially, and so the farmers get to determine their own price, essentially for the price of any of the dairy products. But there's kind of a legal framework that protects it because that prevents other countries from like coming in and underselling it. So, but it's provided. It's interesting because it's kind of people were kind of complaining about it, but they all knew that system, that cooperative system, allowed family farmers to thrive in a very rocky and northern and not very hospitable climate against much more competitive countries. But there was a legal framework that provided the context, and then the dairy farmers could kind of run with it, essentially, it seemed like. So I don't know if there's like that kind of level of cooperation where there's the law could allow it so that individuals could do things like that, or farmers to do things like that.
No, that's a very interesting observation, and I've had the chance to work with some people in Norway and have friends that live there. And Norway is a very interesting example. Part of it, why people are okay with it, they kind of, cheese is really expensive, is that they get paid really well.
Yeah.
Kind of across the board, and healthcare is covered, and some of these things structurally that we've talked about. At the same time, there's this really interesting dynamic in that both Norway and Sweden have created these kind of protected economic zones just across the border. Mm-hmm. And you can go to these stores that are the equivalent of Costco. Mm-hmm. And you can go across the border and you can buy X amount of bottles of alcohol, and food is cheaper because it's in this protected zone. But it's really looked down upon if you get caught doing it. They send these buses, but you don't want to get caught with your bag from that shop. Mm-hmm. It's called Harry shopping or Harry shopping, after kind of your typical English name, Harry. Harry is a real middle class name, and so you're being really kind of classless to go across the border to buy cheaper food. Yeah. But a lot of people do it. So there's this really interesting dynamic that while wages are pushed up and food prices are higher and everything's really expensive, there's also kind of a resignation that, okay, it's not so bad. We pay a little more for our cheese. So around the legal structures, it's the inequality between countries that provides for some of that tension.
But it does provide a context then for the dairy farmers in this particular case. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, rocky, mountainous, northern climate, how would you compete? but they provided kind of a framework that allowed that to occur. So
That's
that
right,
you
and
have-
there's a legal protection on farmland. You cannot just, if something is designated as farmland,
Yeah.
it has to stay farmland if it gets sold. You can't just buy it and then turn it into some development. So there's a legal protection around land.
Mhm.
But you're right, there are all sorts of legal structures around it. Yeah.
There was an article in the local paper just recently that probably more than half of corn production is going into ethanol for fuel instead of food, even for animals.
Which was one of the primary reasons that you saw food riots 2008 to 2011, what we typically refer to as the most recent food crisis, because while not much more corn was being planted, kind of almost maxed that out in the US, more and more percentage was going to biofuel, thereby increasing food prices.
I'd like to hear from our younger people here today, if they have questions. It's their future more than ours.
Yeah.
You said that like sharing is like a big part of the economy, but what do you think about someone who is just living with a friend and they're like not really contributing very much?
Oh, the free rider?
Yeah, do you still like consider that they're still like an important part of the economy?
Yeah, I think that, economists have been writing about this for decades, and that's not my real area of expertise, but, some people are just going to be lazy, and it's unfortunate. But for me, and I think some other people, is just kind of have to roll with it. We're not going to let them keep us from doing new and interesting stuff, and maybe we'll convince them, They're less of a problem than big corporations and legal structures that keep people out of being able to do something that they would be good at. Yeah.
Reading more and more, by the way, I wrote down, I'm from Minnesota, came down yesterday, listening to economist Robert Reich was on campus public radio yesterday, talking as you did, instead of demonizing this or that corporation, of thinking systemically of how to, in a sense, from the bottom up, effect some changes. But I've been doing a lot of reading, and there's more and more information out about population connection, so that in living harmoniously on the earth in some sort of balance, that human numbers have far exceeded, given the fact that humans alter their environment so drastically, that human numbers are probably a big factor in this the scenario that you're laying out. What are your thoughts about that?
And that is almost Pandora's box.